In this lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to see how to add some more styles to our table. The very first style that I want to use will help us see the outlines of the table by placing a border around it. And of course, it's the border style. So let's go back over to our HTML page. And up here at the top, let's add in a style tag so we can start building our style rules. We'll start with the table tag itself as our selector. And the property I want to use this time is called border. This is actually a shorthand version of the property, but it's probably the most common way to use it. In the shorthand, I specify 3 different values. The first one is the thickness of the border, and I'll just set that to 1 pixel. The second value will be the style of the border that we're going to use. For our example, I'll use solid, but we can also pick styles like dashed or dotted. And then finally, we specify the color of our border. For our example, I'll just use red, but we can use any color definition we want here. Now, I mentioned this is shorthand. We could instead specify 3 different properties: border width, border style, and border color. But since you usually need all 3 to specify your border, it's great to use this shorthand when you can. Now let's see what we've got. I'll just save that style change and refresh our page. And now you can see a small 1 pixel red border all the way around our table. Now you notice by just using table as selector, we only get the outside border. But let's go and modify this selector. I'll use the comma to make it into a combo, and we'll add in the TD tags. That will be every table cell. Let's save that change. And now when I refresh, you can see that all of my cells down here lower in the table are outlined. Of course, the headings at the top don't have any outline around them because we switched them out to a TH tag. So again, we'll just extend our combination with another comma, and we'll add the TH into it. Now when I save and refresh, you can see that all of my table cells have a border around them now. Now it'll be a little bit easier for us to see some of the other changes as well. A very basic style change we can make is to the width and height of the table itself. I'll make another style that just isolates the table selector, so we can change its width and height without affecting the table cells or the table header tags. I'll start off with the width, and again we can use any measurement system we want. I'll just set ours to 500 pixels. And for the height, I'll set it to 500 as well. Let's save that, and we'll refresh our browser page. And now you can see we have a much bigger table than we had before. The extents of the table are 500 by 500, so it's square, and it automatically divides up the rest of the area. In columns, it gives us equal spaces, and in height, you'll notice that it pushes all the extra values into the body area, leaving both the T-head and the T-foot as smaller. Now we can set individual heights or widths on any column, cell, or row. Let's add a height to just the TH tags. I'll go back to our document, and I'll make a selector with the TH tag, and we'll just set the height to 80 pixels. We'll finish out our style rule, save, and this time when we refresh, you can see that we've modified the whole row of TH tags to be taller. And again, the rest of the height is divided up amongst the body part of the table. We can also set up height and width on an individual cell, and it's interesting to see how the table responds. So let's just go make a change to our document, and I'll go to the second column here of our header, and I'll just add a class to it. I'll set the value equal to small dash column. And then we can build a style for that class up here. We'll use dot and the class name. And here I'll set a width of 50 pixels. I'll save that change. And this time when we refresh the browser, you can see that that particular column is much smaller, and the extra space has been divided between the other 2 columns. Generally, when working with tables, when you set the row or height of a single cell, it'll carry that value all the way through the table if it can. And since I don't have any width set on the lower 2 items, they inherit the width from the top row. Be careful if you start adding too many widths and heights to the columns, because it can be difficult to figure out what the table's going to do. Now that we've made our table bigger, one of the other things that you can see is the placement of the data inside the table cells. As I said before, a T-head tag automatically centers the data, but the default alignment for our normal TD tags is left aligned. We can also see that there's a vertical alignment going on. With all of our table cells, the default vertical alignment is middle. So each one of our data elements is hanging right in the middle of the block. Let's see how we can modify those. I'll use a TD selector to specify all of our table cells. And first, let's modify the horizontal alignment. For that, we just use our normal text align property, the same one we use with paragraphs. I'll set all of ours to right aligned. Now, tables are fairly unique in that we're allowed to modify the vertical alignment as well. As I said before, the default vertical alignment is middle. But let's just use the vertical align property. And I'll set all of our TDs to bottom. Close up that style rule. We'll save. And let's go see what that does to our table. Now we can see that all the contents of our data cells have been pushed down to the bottom of the cell and over to the right. Now, of course, our TH tags weren't affected because that wasn't included in our selector. But we can override the default styles there as well. Now, one other thing that we can easily see with our text pushed down into the bottom corner of our cells would be the effect of our spacing and padding. We can go back and add that to our TD rule over here. It's the same property we saw before. And like before, we can either use the shorthand or any of the individual properties to affect each side. I'll just set a generic padding of, let's say, 30 pixels for all the table cells. Let's save and refresh our page. And there you can see that the data is still down in the bottom right corner, but now it's 30 pixels away from each edge. It's interesting to note that we set padding on all the TDs, but not on the THs. So this padding down here in these two cells pushed out the sides, but we still have wrapped text, because the 50 pixel limit isn't quite enough for the text to stretch completely out. But since our table cell up here doesn't have any padding, the text is unwrapped to stretch out to a single line. Again, we could change the padding on our T-edge cells just as easily. But there's one more spacing issue that I want to take a look at first. You might have noticed that with our borders on the table cells, we have a tiny space here in between each cell. Well, that's handled with another property. I'll go back up to the style rule we created for the table tag, and we'll add in a new property, border-spacing. Tables are basically the only elements that are going to have this property, because of the way the parts stack together. As we saw earlier, there's a default spacing, but I could increase it here by setting it to 10 pixels. When we refresh our page, you can see that that's dramatically increased the size of the spacing. And you can see that we not only have spacing between the items themselves, but also between the cells and the table border. Unless you wanted to create a gutter inside your tables, the most common setting for this is actually setting it down to 0, and that'll eliminate the spacing altogether. I'll save that change, and when we come back and refresh, you can see that all of our borders are compressed down to just a thin line. Now, the last thing I want to look at with styles is making use of those grouping tags that we built for HTML5. I'll add some tags that change the backgrounds. So we'll start with the T head, and I'll change the background color there to light blue. And let's make another style rule for the T foot tag. And we'll make that background color light green. When we save that change and go back out to the browser, you can see that that easily lets us identify and style both the head and the foot elements, and of course we could use the T-body tag as well if we needed to. Well, that covers the basic styles that we'll be using on tables. In our next lesson, it's time to go back to the website project and we'll set up the coffee drinks page.